I don't have a one member in my family who I'm just hoping reads the book. I didn't write the book to try and change like my parents or get at somebody or whatever. I really wrote the book as our story to help other people who I had talked to. I felt these same feelings of isolation, and I felt like it bred this control aspect that's not healthy.
Hey friends, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It is Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023. I'm so sorry. I'm like so behind. I have all these topics, but I've been sick. Still not feeling the best, so please enjoy this voiceover. But Jill Duggar's book is a New York Times bestseller, and she actually got a pretty big spread in the Los Angeles Times. And an interview with her and Derick actually revealed something that I've reported on this channel, and I was proud of them for saying something publicly, but kind of shocked because it's never been addressed publicly. And it's been something that a lot of you on this channel haven't really believed. It has to do with the education of the Duggars and the lack of education. In fact, the lack of education that is to the 7th grade. So remember when you would watch Counting On and they would have the graduations and she would say that they graduated high school? And the kids would pretend like they graduated high school and they'd have like a graduation party. Well, that turns out it was all false. And education was put on the back burner. And Jill actually wrote about that in her book, Counting the Costs, where she talked about once the show got going, they just put their focus into the show and really just stopped educating the kids because the show was their priority. And she talks about, they would go on trips and they would use that as education or to justify education. And they just seemed to take this position that the money train was never going to stop. And so why then would they need to educate the kids? Because they would always have the show money to fall back on, sort of. Well, in the interview, they touched on their lack of education and really the detrimental way it's sort of impacted their family and the siblings. One of the biggest things I always notice when I listen to the interviews with the Duggars is they have limited vocabulary. They speak in scripts and they don't speak like they have a high school education. And I don't mean to sound mean or rude. They have very simplistic structures of their sentences. They are very measured in how they speak, and they seem to get very nervous when they have to go off of a script. They have to almost prepare everything that they say ahead of time. And they're also kind of awkward in their public speaking, and that's a lot to do with the isolation around the way that they grew up in the IBLP. So one of the questions they asked her outside of the education had to do with the fact that she didn't want to have her child, Israel or Samuel, on the show. She did not want to have the births filmed at all. And Jill admits she was brainwashed. So she said that there were definitely frustrations before the birth situation, but I was very brainwashed into thinking that this was my normal life. I must submit to this. We were conditioned by these principles that I was reared under, the IBLP principles, where you have to honor your parents, but to honor means to obey far into adulthood and marriage. So if my dad says, I give you my blessing for this, you're supposed to follow whatever it is. So if it means filming the birth, then you're supposed to do that. Derick went on to call it a toxic culture, and that at their wedding, for instance, they wanted to let people take photographs, but they wouldn't let them do that for the show. But Josh gave a speech basically saying that the bride and groom don't want you to take photos. Reality television was kind of a complicated place for them because they were, one, undereducated, and two, they were under this complete control by the Duggars belief system in the IBLP. Theoretically, the lack of education was a huge component in this. So one of the things they asked them was about how an industry can operate ethically. And Derick mentioned that the fact that there's literally no guidelines at all for reality television kids, they don't have any unions, they don't have any standards, they don't have anything to ensure that like a kid that's on set, and it is a set, you guys, has education met for the day. Derick said, there's nothing to make sure kids are protected as far as their education goes. If a family sees an opportunity to make money, they can justify taking away their kids' time in school because, well, they don't need education. They can just have this money to support them. Jill can attest to this, but from what we can tell, none of her siblings really had much education past the 7th grade. A lot of that was due to the show taking over. It was like, well, if the show requires most of the filming hours during the weekday, the school is not really that important. Jill also thinks as a result of that, networks need to have more accountability to make sure that kids are protected and are getting the education that they need. She said that the TV show, networks need to make sure that the TV show is not taking priority and that the rights are not being violated of the child. And every single child has a right to education. So they asked Jill, do you feel like you were deprived of education? And she said, yes, I do. I went on to take some college classes. I got a midwifery certificate, and that's inactive. But I do think that the show took priority in a lot of areas of our lives. There were great parts to it, but it was also a lot of difficulty. And because of their lack of education and the way that they were in control of Jim Bob, she said that they were like perfect victims to not understanding contracts, to not knowing what they were signing, to not knowing about the industry, to really just believing whatever their dad said. So if he said that it was a ministry, why would they question? And she's kids in this lifestyle that we were reared in. We were the perfect victims. We weren't going to push back a whole lot to the network. We weren't going to speak up and say no. And when the contract was set before me, they were probably like, oh, any normal adult would have read what they were signing. But I don't know if they were turning a blind eye to the signs and symptoms that they saw popping up. But at the end of the day, we had a show to make. They had a show to make. And I think there was no accountability for them. Derick thinks people didn't do their due diligence when it comes to the network. So when you think about it in this context, Jim Bob not only didn't pay his kids, but he also didn't educate his kids. And I found this really old article of Jim and Michelle's from like back in 2001, and they talked to Quiverful magazine. And even back then, before the show, she told the magazine that her children should be trained and ready to go into the world and independent of them at 12 years old. At 12 years old. They should be able to take care of themselves, she said. Now, if you think of it in the education here, after 7th grade, most people that finish 7th grade are 13. On the young side, they might be 12. So really, from the very beginning, they never probably intended to educate their kids beyond the 7th grade. Now, a friend of the Duggars told me a long time ago that he didn't believe that they had an education beyond the 8th grade. To hear 7th grade, 7th grade is, you're not even in algebra at that point. And I remember the friend telling me that most of the kids haven't had algebra. They haven't had geometry. They haven't had algebra 2. They haven't had any classes. Now, people don't like math, but math teaches how to do complex problem solving, specifically higher level math classes that are taken in high school. It teaches critical thinking as well when you have to do higher, when you have to go into different problem solving methods within math. They're not taking any higher level education when it comes to science either, which teaches critical thinking skills. They're not taking any world history, so they have a limited understanding of the world, the proper U.S. history. They're not getting social studies. They're not getting U.S. civics. They're only hearing whatever the cult tells them. They're not learning a second language, because in most high schools, most kids will take, whether it's Spanish or German or French, whatever, Italian, whatever the school offers. I took Spanish and I got my actual college degree in Spanish. But there's a need for these higher level classes as well as language arts. So if you think about in high school, this is when you would take classes like in humanities, you would take communications classes, you would take classes in literature. All of that was gone. They didn't get that kind of stuff, anything. So they didn't get to learn about the great classics of the world. They didn't get to take classes to learn about creative writing. They didn't have classes in literature and English that taught them more vocabulary, basic structures of sentences and how to speak. One of the better classes I ever took in high school, and I don't know what high school is like today. I know things have changed, but I took communications in my 10th grade year. And that's what really taught me how to be a better communicator and understanding how to have communication skills where you can express your needs and your wants without placing blame onto someone else. You also learned in my communications class how to give a public speech and how to speak well. I also was in speech, so I took I did that club where you could do speech. They missed out on all of these things that are offered in schools that help to sculpt and develop the mind of a brain that's developing still. And instead they thrust them into the world of reality television, denying them the ability to further learn. But for Jim Bob, keeping them ignorant kept them easier to control. So Jill and her sisters really didn't have any means to do anything beyond becoming wives and broodmares to their husbands. The sons become dependent on Jim Bob. They don't have high school diplomas. The state of Arkansas, I cannot underscore this enough, has some of the most lax laws for homeschooling in the entire country. And the reason being is because Arkansas has been infiltrated by the IBLP and these Christian evangelical, very highly conservative HSLDA stuff, where they don't want any accountability and let just parents completely have freedom in education. Some states don't even have testing anymore, and Arkansas got rid of testing. So there was no requirements for mandated. They don't even have to send in the transcripts to the schools to verify that the child went to school. A parent can just decide that they've been educated and then they're done. Now, not all parents that educate at home are bad like the Duggars. And this isn't an expose on the harms of homeschooling, because there are parents that do it the right way. But for the parents that want to do it the wrong way, like the Duggars, Arkansas was the perfect place for them to be because they didn't have to do it the right way. I know plenty of you in my comments and those that watch have homeschooled your children, and they've gone on to college and they've gone on to have successful careers and become successful humans, and you found ways to have them not only have a balance in their education but also in their clubs and their extracurriculars. So it's not at all an indictment on homeschooling. Again, the Duggars were able to manipulate and capitalize on the lack of oversight in the state of Arkansas and the lack of oversight in reality television, and completely keep their kids undereducated and ignorant so that Jim Bob could continue to have control over his children. It's pretty sick if you think about it. One more thing I just wanted to talk about is, before we go, is on what's going on with the Duggar family and the relationship. So Jill did an interview with CNN, and she talked about where things are at with her siblings since she wrote the book. And she said, I kind of refrain from saying specifically who is in our corner and who is still sorting things out. But other than just the positive feedback that I've had from one of my sisters, Ginger, she doesn't care that I say anything, but she's been very supportive and very positive. And then some of my other ones have been supportive behind closed doors. I just know for them and the space that they're in, they have to be careful. They have to be careful of disobeying their dad. I mean, these people are adults, and they can't show public support for their sister because they're afraid of their dad, even if they feel like they're trying to exit the IBLP. And then there's some siblings that don't agree with her at all and don't want to talk about it. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are about this. I've been doing more IBLP stuff over on my Instagram and my Facebook. I've been covering this whole issue with Trace Bates' in-laws, the Remikes, and their deportation, which is a whole nother mess of propaganda and all laced in IBLP extremism and lies. You can check my Instagram for that. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are about the undereducation of the Duggars. Jim Bob and Michelle have done a massive disservice to their children. There needs to be accountability, in my opinion, for reality television. And I'm utterly just disgusted that yes, I'm glad that my sources don't lie to me, but it's just disgusting that it's taken how many years? It's 2023 now, and we're now just learning that they don't have education beyond the 7th grade. The only person in this family that has a GED is Josh, and he's in prison. Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Bye, guys.